Marcus had always thought house sitting would be easy money. A few weeks in someone else's home, water the plants, feed a cat maybe, and collect a paycheck that would cover 3 months of rent back in the city. When the listing appeared on the freelance board, it seemed almost too good to be true. A cliffside mansion overlooking the Pacific. No pets, no plants, just presence. The owners needed someone to occupy the space while they traveled abroad for 6 weeks. The pay was exceptional, nearly $15,000, and all Marcus had to do was follow a few simple rules. He should have known better. The drive up the coastal highway took most of the afternoon. Marcus watched as the landscape shifted from urban sprawl to rural emptiness, the road winding higher and higher above the churning gray ocean below. The GPS signal flickered and died somewhere around the 30-mile mark, but the handwritten directions the owners had mailed him were clear enough. Turn at the weathered lighthouse. Follow the unmarked road for 3 miles. Look for the iron gates with the anchor motif. The mansion appeared suddenly through the fog, a sprawling Victorian structure that seemed to grow directly from the cliff face itself. Dark wood and darker windows. 3 stories of architectural ambition clinging to the rocky promontory like something that had washed ashore and decided to stay. Marcus pulled his car through the open gates, the hinges shrieking in protest, and parked in the circular drive. The sound of waves crashing against rocks far below filled the air, a constant rhythmic thunder that he knew would take days to stop noticing. The key was where they said it would be, under a stone turtle by the front steps. Marcus let himself in, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous entrance hall. Marble floors, a grand staircase that split into 2 directions, portraits of stern-faced ancestors staring down from wood-paneled walls. The furniture was old but immaculate, the kind of antiques that belong in museums rather than homes. Everything smelled of salt and old wood and something else, something faintly metallic that Marcus could not quite place. He found the welcome packet on the kitchen table, a manila envelope thick with papers. Inside was a cashier's check for half the payment, to be deposited immediately, with the remainder to be paid upon successful completion of the assignment. There was also a 3-page document titled House Sitting Guidelines and Regulations. Marcus poured himself a glass of water from the tap, which ran rust-colored for several seconds before clearing, and began to read. Rule 1 was simple enough. All exterior doors must be locked before sunset. Every single one, no exceptions. The house had 7 exterior doors, according to the hand-drawn map included in the packet. Front door, back door, 3 sets of French doors leading to various balconies and patios, and 2 basement entrances that opened onto the rocky beach below. Marcus was to check each one personally every evening as the sun touched the horizon, testing the locks twice, and then check them again before going to bed. Rule 2 made him pause. Do not, under any circumstances, opened the curtains in the library. The library was marked on the map as a room on the second floor, facing the ocean. The curtains were to remain closed at all times, day and night. If Marcus needed to access the library for any reason, he was to do so without disturbing the heavy velvet drapes that covered the floor to ceiling windows. He was not to peek through them. He was not to pull them aside even slightly. They were to remain shut. Rule 3 specified that between the hours of midnight and 3 in the morning, Marcus was to remain on the second floor of the house. He could move freely through the rest of the structure during all other hours. But during those 3 hours, he was to stay in the second floor hallway or in one of the second floor bedrooms. He was not to go downstairs. He was not to go to the third floor. He was especially not to go down to the basement. Rule 4 addressed the ocean itself. If Marcus heard singing coming from the water, he was to close and lock all windows immediately, turn on every radio and television in the house to maximum volume, and wait in the innermost room on the second floor until the singing stopped. He was not to listen to the words. He was not to try to identify the melody. He was under no circumstances to go outside while the singing continued. Rule 5 was brief but emphatic. Do not answer the front door after dark, no matter who knocks, no matter what they say, no matter how desperately they claim to need help. The door was to remain locked, and Marcus was to remain silent. Anyone with legitimate business at the house would arrive during daylight hours. Rule 6 concerned the mirrors. There were 18 mirrors in the house, according to the inventory list. Everything from small decorative pieces to a massive gilt-framed mirror in the main hallway that reflected the staircase. Every mirror was to be covered with a cloth before Marcus went to sleep each night, and uncovered each morning after sunrise. The linen closet on the second floor contained sufficient sheets for this purpose. This was described as non-negotiable. Rule 7 was the longest and most specific. If Marcus woke in the night to find the house completely silent, if the ever-present sound of waves suddenly stopped, he was to get out of bed immediately. He was to go to the second floor bathroom, fill the clawfoot tub with cold water, and submerge himself completely for a count of 30. He was then to drain the tub, dry himself, and return to bed without looking out any windows or into any mirrors, covered or otherwise. The silence would pass. The waves would return. He was to act as though nothing had happened. The final rule was handwritten at the bottom of the page in shaky script. Keep the sea quiet. Do not anger it. Do not draw its attention. Follow all instructions exactly, and you will be safe. Deviate from these rules, and we cannot protect you. The house has stood for 140 years by maintaining this balance. Your job is to ensure that balance continues. Marcus read through the rules 3 times, then folded the papers and slipped them into his back pocket. He told himself that rich people were eccentric, that old houses had quirks, that 6 weeks of following bizarre instructions was worth $15,000. He told himself a lot of things that first afternoon. The house was larger than he expected. The first floor held the entrance hall, a formal dining room that could seat 20, a kitchen that seemed to have been updated sometime in the 1950s and never touched since, a parlor with furniture covered in white sheets, and a sunroom whose glass walls provided a panoramic view of the gray ocean stretching endlessly westward. The second floor contained 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, the mysterious library with its perpetually closed curtains, and a sitting room filled with bookshelves and a card table. The third floor was locked, with a simple sign hanging from the doorknob that read private. The basement entrances took longer to locate. One was accessed through a door in the kitchen, stone steps descending into darkness. The other was outside, a slanted cellar door set into the foundation on the north side of the house. Marcus walked down to check it, his shoes slipping on the wet grass, and found it secured with a heavy padlock and chain. Through the gap between the doors, he could see only blackness and smell salt water and something rotting. He spent the first evening exploring and settling in, choosing a bedroom on the second floor that faced inland rather than toward the ocean. The bed was comfortable enough, the linens clean if somewhat musty. As sunset approached, Marcus retrieved the map and began his first door check. Front door locked, back door locked, French doors in the dining room locked, French doors in the parlor locked, French doors in the sunroom locked, basement door in the kitchen locked, exterior basement door locked and chained. He tested each one twice as instructed, pulling hard on the handles, listening for the click of properly engaged locks. Night fell, and the house settled around him with creaks and groans. Marcus made himself dinner from the groceries he had brought, pasta with jarred sauce, and ate alone at the enormous dining room table. The sound of waves was louder after dark, a constant aggressive presence that seemed to make the windows rattle in their frames. He washed his dishes, checked the locks again, and began the process of covering the mirrors. There were more mirrors than he expected. Small ones in hallways, large ones in bedrooms, an oval mirror in the downstairs bathroom that took 2 sheets to cover properly. The massive mirror in the entrance hall required a ladder and considerable effort. Marcus stood on the 5th rung, draping white linen over carved wood and antique glass, and caught a glimpse of his own reflection before it disappeared beneath the cloth. He looked tired. He looked uneasy. He looked like someone who was already regretting his decision. By 11:30, all 18 mirrors were covered, and Marcus retreated to his second floor bedroom. He read for a while, a paperback mystery he had brought from home, but found himself checking the time every few pages. The rules said he had to stay on the second floor between midnight and 3 in the morning. He did not know what would happen if he broke that rule. He did not want to find out. Midnight came and went, house was silent except for the waves and the occasional creak of old wood adjusting to temperature changes. Marcus turned off his light and tried to sleep, but his mind would not settle. He kept thinking about the rules, about the intensity of that handwritten warning. Keep the sea quiet. What did that even mean? How could the sea be anything but what it was? Indifferent and vast, and governed by forces far beyond human control. He must have dozed eventually, because he woke suddenly to complete and total silence. The waves had stopped. Marcus lay in bed, his heart hammering, straining his ears for the sound that had been constant since his arrival. Nothing. The silence was so profound it seemed to have physical weight, pressing down on him, filling his ears with empty pressure. He threw back the covers and stumbled to the bathroom, not letting himself think, just following the instructions exactly as they had been written. The cold water filled the tub slowly, the pipes clanking and shuddering. Marcus stripped off his clothes with shaking hands and climbed in while the water was still running. It was shockingly cold, so cold it felt like being stabbed with 1,000 tiny knives. He took a deep breath and submerged himself completely, forcing himself to stay under, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. The water pressed against his closed eyes. 5, 6, 7. His lungs began to burn. 10, 11, 12. He wanted desperately to surface, but the rules said 30. 15, 16, 17. At 27, his hand found the drain plug without conscious thought. At 28, he broke the surface, gasping. At 29, he heard the waves start again, distant and muffled, then growing louder. At 30, he was standing in the emptying tub, water streaming from his hair, his entire body shaking with cold and adrenaline. He dried himself mechanically, pulled his clothes back on, and returned to bed without looking at any of the covered mirrors or toward any windows. His hands were still shaking. The sound of waves crashing against the cliff had returned as though it had never stopped. But Marcus knew what he had heard. The ocean had gone quiet. The rule was real. All of the rules were real. He did not sleep again that night. Morning came eventually, gray light filtering through the curtains. Marcus uncovered the mirrors with numb efficiency, trying not to think about what had happened, trying to tell himself it had been a dream, even though he knew better. His hair was still damp. The bathroom floor was still wet. The waves crashed on and on and on. The next few days passed in uneasy routine. Marcus woke at sunrise, uncovered the mirrors, made breakfast, and found ways to occupy his time. He explored the house room by room, finding odd artifacts and stranger furnishings. A music box that played a melody he did not recognize. Photographs of people standing on the beach below, their faces always turned away from the camera. Books in languages Marcus did not know, with illustrations that seemed to shift when he was not looking directly at them. He avoided the library with its closed curtains. He did not go near the third floor door. Evenings were spent checking and rechecking the locks, covering the mirrors, and retreating to the second floor before midnight. Twice more Marcus woke to silence, and twice more he performed the ritual of the cold water bath, forcing himself under, counting to 30, while his heart tried to beat its way out of his chest. Each time the waves returned. Each time he lay awake until dawn, wondering what would happen if he did not follow the rules. On the 8th night, Marcus heard singing. It started just after 11, a high, clear voice carrying across the water. He was in the parlor, reading by lamplight, when the first notes drifted through the closed windows. The song was beautiful, achingly so, a melody that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his chest. He found himself standing without meaning to, walking toward the sunroom and its panoramic windows, drawn by something he could not name and did not want to resist. The rules said to close and lock all windows, to turn on every radio and television, to hide in the innermost room until the singing stopped. Marcus stood frozen between the parlor and the sunroom, the song growing louder, words in a language he did not speak, but somehow understood on a level deeper than language. Come down, come to the water, come home. He forced himself to move, running from room to room, checking windows that he knew were already closed, locking them again anyway. His hands fumbled with latches and locks. The singing grew louder, multiple voices now, harmonizing in impossible ways. Marcus found the ancient radio in the kitchen and turned it on, spinning the dial until static blared from the speakers. He found the television in the parlor and turned it to maximum volume. Some late-night infomercial shouting about kitchen knives. The cacophony was almost as overwhelming as the singing, but at least it was something else, something to focus on besides that terrible, beautiful call from the water. The innermost room on the second floor was a windowless linen closet. Marcus wedged himself between shelves of sheets and towels, pressed his hands over his ears, and waited. He could still hear the singing underneath the noise, could still feel it pulling at something fundamental inside him. Come down, come to the water, come home. It would be so easy to walk down the stairs, to unlock the basement door, to follow the stone steps down to where the beach met the house. So easy to wade out into the cold water and find the sources of those voices. So easy to stop fighting and just give in. He bit his tongue hard enough to taste blood. The pain helped. He focused on it, on the sharp copper tang, on the physical reality of his body crammed into a dark closet in a house that should not exist. Time lost meaning. The singing continued and continued and continued. Then it stopped. Marcus waited 5 more minutes by his watch before emerging from the closet. The television and radio were still blaring. He went downstairs and turned them both off, plunging the house back into its usual background of waves and creaking wood. His legs felt weak. His hands would not stop shaking. He checked every lock 3 times before he trusted himself to stop, before he climbed back up to the 2nd floor and collapsed into bed fully clothed. Sleep came in fragments, dream images of deep water and reaching hands, of voices singing words that would unmake him if he understood them fully. He woke at dawn feeling like he had not rested at all, and began the process of uncovering the mirrors once again. 2 weeks passed. Marcus fell into the rhythm of the rules, his life shrinking to the size of precautions and procedures. Lock the doors at sunset. Cover the mirrors at night. Stay on the 2nd floor between midnight and 3. Close the windows during the singing, which came irregularly, sometimes 3 nights in a row, sometimes not for days at a time. Perform the cold water ritual when the waves went silent. Do not open the library curtains. Do not answer the door after dark. That last rule was tested on the 17th night. Marcus was in the 2nd floor sitting room, playing solitaire with a deck of cards he had found in a drawer, when someone knocked on the front door. 3 firm, deliberate knocks that echoed through the house. He froze, a 7 of clubs held halfway to its destination. The knock came again, harder this time, more insistent. Do not answer the door after dark. No matter who knocks, no matter what they say, no matter how desperately they claim to need help. Marcus stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. A 3rd round of knocking, aggressive now, demanding. Then a voice, muffled by wood and distance, but still audible. Help me, please. I know someone is in there. I need help. Please. The voice was male, rough, desperate. Marcus could picture someone standing on those front steps, looking up at the lighted windows, knowing the house was occupied. Every instinct screamed at him to go downstairs, to at least look through the peephole, to see if someone really needed assistance. But the rules were clear, and Marcus had learned to trust them. Please, my boat capsized. I swam to shore. I am so cold. Please just let me in, just for a few minutes. Please. The voice cracked on that last word, raw with what sounded like genuine distress. Marcus gripped the edge of the card table, his knuckles white, and did not move. The knocking started again, a steady pounding now, both fists hammering against the door. The voice rose in volume, the words coming faster. I know you can hear me. I know you are in there. Why will you not help me? What kind of person refuses to help someone in need? Open the door. Open the door. Open the door. The desperation was gone from the voice now, replaced by something harder, something angry. The pounding continued, so loud Marcus was sure the door would splinter. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Silence for a long moment, just the waves and Marcus's ragged breathing. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the house. Marcus heard them pass under his window, crunching on gravel, moving toward the back of the structure. A door handle rattled. The French doors in the dining room, Marcus thought. Then another. The parlor doors. Then the sunroom. The footsteps went all the way around the house, testing every entrance, trying every door. Marcus sat frozen in the upstairs sitting room, listening to someone or something methodically checking to see if he had made a mistake, if he had left any way in. The basement doors rattled in their frames. The footsteps climbed the outside stairs to the second-floor balcony. A window scraped as someone tried to force it open. Everything was locked. Marcus had checked them himself at sunset, had tested each one twice. The footsteps completed their circuit and returned to the front of the house. A long pause, then a voice again, directly below where Marcus sat. "You should have let me in." The words were calm, almost conversational, but they carried a weight that made Marcus's skin crawl. He heard footsteps retreating down the gravel drive, fading into the distance. Then, nothing but waves. Marcus did not move for another hour. When he finally found the courage to look out the window, he could see nothing in the darkness beyond the reach of the porch lights. No figure walking away. No sign that anyone had been there at all. In the morning, he would find deep gouges in the front door, marks that looked like they had been made by something with claws rather than hands. He would find scratches on every window frame, deep scores in the wood that wept sap. But that night, he simply sat in the upstairs room and played solitaire with shaking hands until the sky began to lighten in the east. The weeks continued. Marcus stopped counting days and started counting hours until his assignment would be complete. The routine of the rules became automatic, his body moving through the required tasks, while his mind retreated somewhere safer. He began to understand why the house had been empty, why the owners needed to pay so much to find someone willing to occupy it. This was not a home. This was a watchtower, a border post, a thin place where the rules of normal reality bent under the weight of something older and more terrible than he wanted to contemplate. The library haunted him, the one room he was forbidden to truly enter, the one mystery he was not supposed to solve. Every time he passed it in the hallway, he felt the pull of those closed curtains, the question of what they were hiding. The door was unlocked. He could go inside. As long as he did not open the curtains, as long as he did not look out at whatever view the oceanside windows provided, he would not be breaking the rules. On the 28th day, Marcus opened the library door. The room was smaller than he expected, more intimate. 3 walls were lined floor to ceiling with books, leather-bound volumes that looked like they had not been touched in decades. The 4th wall was hidden behind heavy velvet curtains, the color of old blood, thick fabric that hung from ceiling to floor in dense folds. The air smelled of dust and salt and aged paper. A single leather chair sat in the center of the room, facing the curtained windows, positioned as though someone had once spent hours there, looking at whatever lay beyond. Marcus stood in the doorway, every nerve ending screaming at him to leave, to close the door and walk away and forget the library existed. Instead, he stepped inside, moving carefully, as though the room were full of water, and any sudden movement would create ripples. The books were in various languages. Some he recognized, many he did not. Titles in Latin, in Greek, in languages that used alphabets he had never seen. One entire shelf held identical leather journals, each one filled with handwriting so small and cramped it was almost illegible. He pulled one of the journals down at random, opening it to a middle page. The entry was dated June 1892 and written in faded brown ink. It described rules, the same rules Marcus had been following, written in meticulous detail, with notes on what happened when they were broken. The writer described waking to silence and performing the cold water ritual. They described the singing and the need to hide from it. They described something knocking at the door, something that wore the voice of the writer's dead brother. Marcus read, standing up, unable to look away, entry after entry, year after year, different hands recording the same experiences. The rules had existed long before the 3-page document he carried in his pocket. The rules had been discovered through trial and error and tragedy. He read about a house sitter in 1907 who had opened the library curtains and been found 3 days later at the bottom of the cliff, every bone in their body broken, their eyes open and staring at the sky. He read about someone in 1934 who had failed to lock the basement door and was never found at all. Just wet footprints leading up the stairs and stopping at the second-floor landing. The journals described the sea as though it were a living thing, a conscious presence that pressed against the house and hungered for a way in. They described the singing as a form of summoning, an invitation that must be refused. They described the silence as the sea holding its breath, waiting to see if its presence would be acknowledged. They described the things that knocked at the door as echoes, imprints of people who had failed to follow the rules, puppets animated by something that wanted very badly to be let inside. Marcus was reading an entry from 1956 when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps, moving along the second-floor corridor, coming toward the library. He looked at his watch. 2:15 in the morning. He had lost track of time reading. He had broken the rule about staying on the second floor between midnight and 3. Except he was on the second floor. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. So, what was walking in the hallway? The footsteps stopped outside the library door. Marcus stood frozen, the journal still open in his hands, not breathing. A long pause. Then the door handle began to turn. Marcus moved without thinking, diving behind the leather chair, pressing himself against the floor. The door opened with a creak of old hinges. Footsteps entered the room, different from the ones in the hallway. These were wet, each one leaving a puddle. The smell of rotting seaweed and dead fish rolled through the air, so strong Marcus had to fight not to gag. The footsteps moved around the room slowly, as though whoever or whatever had entered was searching for something. Marcus heard books being pulled from shelves and dropped to the floor, the heavy thud of leather on wood. He heard the scrape of nails or claws against the walls. He heard breathing, if it could be called that, a wet, rattling sound like lungs full of water trying to process air. Then the footsteps moved toward the chair, toward where Marcus hid. He closed his eyes, knowing it would not help, knowing he was about to be found. The footsteps came around the side of the chair, stopped. The breathing was directly above him now, that terrible drowning sound. A drop of water hit Marcus's hand, then another. He opened his eyes and looked up. There was nothing there, empty air, but the breathing continued, and the water kept dripping, cold and reeking of salt and rot. Marcus lay absolutely still, feeling drops hit his skin, his clothes, pooling on the floor around him. The breathing moved away, circling back toward the door. The wet footsteps retreated into the hallway, fading into the distance. Marcus stayed behind the chair until his watch said 3:30. Then he stood on legs that barely supported him, stepped over puddles of seawater that were already evaporating, and walked very carefully back to his bedroom. He did not sleep. He sat on the bed with every light on and watched the window until sunrise. He did not return to the library. The final 2 weeks were a test of endurance. Marcus followed the rules with obsessive precision, checking locks until his hands hurt, covering mirrors with military efficiency, retreating to the second-floor hallway at 11:55 each night, and staying there until 3:05. He stopped exploring. He stopped reading. He spent his days sitting in the second-floor sitting room, staring at the wall, waiting for his time to be up. The singing came almost every night now, growing bolder, the voices multiplying. Sometimes it was a chorus, dozens of voices in perfect harmony. Sometimes it was a single voice that sounded like his mother, calling him by his childhood nickname. Sometimes it was a voice that sounded like Marcus himself, singing words he had never learned. He weathered it in the linen closet, with his hands pressed over his ears, counting the seconds until it stopped. The silence came more frequently too, the ocean holding its breath 3 or 4 times a week. Marcus performed the cold water ritual, so often his skin was rubbed raw from toweling off. He no longer questioned it. He simply did what the rules required, and tried not to think about what would happen if he ever failed. On the 39th day, he broke a rule. Not intentionally, not through carelessness, but the result was the same. Marcus was covering the mirrors before bed, working his way through the house with his armful of sheets. When he reached the large mirror in the entrance hall, he climbed the ladder as he had every night, draped the linen over the top of the frame, and let it fall to cover the glass. Except this time, the sheet caught on the ornate carving, pulling to one side, leaving a strip of mirror exposed. Marcus was already climbing down when he noticed. He should have gone back up immediately, should have adjusted the sheet to cover every inch of reflective surface. But he was tired, bone tired, in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. It was a small strip, barely 6 inches. Surely that would not matter. Surely the rule was about covering most of the mirrors, not being absolutely perfect about it. He left it and went to bed. He woke to the sound of breathing, not the wet, drowning sound from the library. This was different. Multiple sources, all around his bed, all synchronized. In and out, in and out. The sound of lungs that should not exist, processing air they had no right to breathe. Marcus kept his eyes closed, knowing what he would see if he opened them, desperately not wanting to confirm it. The breathing continued, patient, waiting. He felt the weight of attention on him, the pressure of being watched by too many eyes. A drop of water hit his face, then another. The smell of rot filled the room. Marcus opened his eyes. They stood around his bed in a circle, shapes that were almost human, but not quite, too tall, too thin, proportions subtly wrong in ways that hurt to perceive. They were made of water, or perhaps they had drowned so long ago they had become water, their edges constantly shifting and reforming. Their faces were the worst part, features that flickered between hundreds of different people, expressions of hunger and longing and rage cycling too fast to track. They stood perfectly still, just breathing, just watching, waiting for something. The mirror. He had left the mirror uncovered, a strip of exposed glass, a reflection they could use as a doorway. That was why the rule existed. That was what happened when you failed. Marcus did the only thing he could think of. He started reciting the rules out loud. All exterior doors must be locked before sunset. Check each one personally. Test the locks twice. Do not open the curtains in the library. The curtains must remain closed at all times. Between midnight and 3 in the morning, remain on the 2nd floor. Do not go downstairs. Do not go to the basement. The figures did not move, but something in the quality of their attention shifted. Marcus kept going, speaking faster, pouring every detail he could remember into the words. If you hear singing from the water, close all windows, turn on every radio and television, hide in the innermost room. Do not listen to the words. Do not try to identify the melody. Do not answer the door after dark. No matter who knocks, no matter what they say, anyone with legitimate business will arrive during daylight. The figures began to flicker, their forms losing cohesion. Marcus's voice rose, taking on the cadence of prayer or ritual. Cover all mirrors before sleeping. Uncover them after sunrise. If you wake to silence, if the waves stop, go to the bathroom. Fill the tub with cold water. Submerge yourself completely. Count to 30. The waves will return. Keep the sea quiet. Do not anger it. Do not draw its attention. The house has stood for 140 years. Your job is to maintain the balance. The last figure faded like mist in sunlight. The breathing stopped. The smell of rot dissipated. Marcus was alone in his bedroom, soaked in cold water, his voice hoarse from speaking. He looked at his watch. 4:37 in the morning. He had been reciting the rules for over an hour. He got out of bed, went downstairs despite the time, climbed the ladder in the entrance hall, and adjusted the sheet to fully cover the mirror. Then he returned to his room, changed into dry clothes, and sat by the window to wait for dawn. 2 days later, at exactly 6 weeks from his arrival, a car pulled up the gravel drive. The owners had returned. They were an older couple, refined and elegant, who surveyed the house with critical eyes while Marcus gathered his belongings. They checked the locks. They examined the mirrors. They stood in the library doorway for a long time, looking at the puddle stains on the floor that had never fully dried. Finally, the woman turned to Marcus and handed him an envelope. "The rest of your payment," she said. "You did well. Better than most." "Most?" Marcus asked. "How many house sitters have you had?" The woman smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Enough," she said. "The house requires constant attention. We cannot leave it empty. It gets hungry when no one is here to maintain the rules." Marcus wanted to ask more, but the weight of her gaze stopped him. He took the envelope and left without another word, driving down the coast road as fast as he dared. In his rearview mirror, the mansion disappeared into the fog, and he let himself believe he would never see it again. But sometimes in the night, he wakes to silence, to the sound of waves that have stopped crashing. Sometimes he hears singing carried on the wind, beautiful and terrible. Sometimes he sees his reflection in a mirror, and there is something standing behind him, just out of frame, watching with eyes that flicker between faces, and he knows the rules. He will always know the rules, because the house is not the only place where the sea presses close. It is not the only threshold that requires maintenance. The rules exist everywhere, invisible and absolute. And once you have learned them, you can never go back to not knowing. Marcus lives in the city now, in a landlocked apartment far from any coast. He keeps all his mirrors covered at night. He never answers his door after dark. And when the silence comes, when the constant background noise of the world suddenly stops, he fills his bathtub with cold water and counts to 30 beneath the surface. Some balances once learned cannot be unlearned. Some prices once understood must be paid forever. The sea is quiet. The sea is patient. The sea remembers everyone who has heard its voice, and it waits just beyond the edge of perception for the moment when someone forgets the rules. Marcus will not forget. Marcus cannot afford to forget, because he knows what stands in the dark at the bottom of cliffs, what sings from the water on moonless nights, what knocks at doors and wears the voices of the dead. He knows, and knowing is its own kind of prison. The check cleared. $15,000 deposited and spent on rent and food and ordinary things. But some payments are not made in money. Some debts are measured in vigilance, in the constant awareness of rules that must not be broken, in the weight of attention from something vast and patient and hungry. Marcus followed the rules. Marcus survived his 6 weeks, but the house sits on its cliff, overlooking the gray Pacific, waiting for the next person who needs money badly enough to ignore their instincts. The owners will place another listing. Someone will respond, and the rules will be passed down once again, written in 3 pages of careful instruction, enforced by consequences too terrible to risk. The sea keeps its secrets. The house keeps its watch, and somewhere in the middle, people like Marcus learn that reality is thinner than they believed, that the world operates according to laws that are never taught in schools, that some bargains extract prices that cannot be calculated until it is far too late to back out. He closes his eyes and hears waves that are not really there. He opens them and sees reflections that show more than they should. The rules are in his pocket still, folded and worn from handling. He does not need to read them anymore. They are written in a deeper place now, carved into the parts of himself that wake at the sound of silence, that tense at the first notes of distant singing. Keep the sea quiet. Do not anger it. Do not draw its attention. Follow the rules exactly. Deviate, and we cannot protect you. The balance must be maintained. Some things must be kept out. Some doors must stay locked. Some curtains must never be opened. Marcus understands now. Marcus believes, and in the dark before dawn, when the world holds its breath, he performs his rituals and keeps his vigil and prays that he never forgets. Because the sea is always listening. The sea is always watching, and the sea never stops calling to those who have heard its voice. The mansion stands on its cliff. The waves crash endlessly against rock. And inside, someone new is reading the rules for the first time, not yet understanding what they have agreed to, not yet knowing the true cost of their 6-week assignment. The cycle continues. It has always continued. It will continue long after Marcus is gone, after everyone who has ever stood in that entrance hall has turned to dust. Because the house is older than its 140 years, the rules are older still. And the thing they keep at bay is oldest of all, patient as stone, hungry as the void, waiting for the moment when someone fails to lock a door or cover a mirror or stay where they belong between the hours when the world is weakest. Marcus survived. But survival and escape are not the same thing. He left the house, but the house did not leave him. It never leaves anyone. That is the final rule, the one they do not write down, the one you only learn by living through it. Once you have maintained the balance, you become part of it. Once you have kept the sea quiet, you carry the responsibility forever. The rules are in your blood now. The watch is in your bones, and somewhere in the gray morning, in a mansion that clings to a cliff above cold water, someone is waking to their first silence. and learning what it means to count to 30 underwater while something vast and terrible holds its breath and waits.